skeptic. I just got to start by getting your reaction as an American citizen, an investor. President Trump being impeached for the second time, the only president to be impeached in history twice. You know, how are you digesting this?
Yeah, I mean, another slow news week, right? I don't know, it all comes at you so fast. You know, I said in the tweet that you mentioned, the night of the riots, these things all change in real time so quickly. It's hard to get historical perspective on them that then seems to come a week later and then maybe change a week after that. So the short answer is I don't know. It certainly is obvious that this will go down as an important moment in history. It's hard to understand in real time how it will be viewed. The diametrically opposed perspectives on the actions that these technology companies are taking from users on the platforms is just, you know, it's something to behold. You've got everybody thinking that it's an obvious decision what should be done. It's just that 45% of the people think one thing and 45% of the people think the exact opposite thing.
So on that note, Twitter has made the decision to ban the president's account permanently. His account has been deleted from Twitter. All of the tweets from the last 4 years are gone. And to be clear, Facebook has suspended him indefinitely, but not permanently. Do you think this was the right call?
You know, look, I'm never going to second guess the management team of the company. And I'll tell you why. I'm not just, you know, bailing out on you. Is because you have all these people who say, this is an easy decision. It should have been done, you know, X years ago. It's easy to say that when you don't have to face any of the consequences of what happens next. It's easy to stand there on the moral high ground when you don't have to think about any of the implications of what might happen later. There are going to undoubtedly be all sorts of regulatory pressure brought to bear on these technology platforms. I'm not just talking about Twitter now. I'm talking about Facebook and AWS removing Parler, which is going to be another sort of potentially wild precedent. I just think that the ramifications that these companies are going to face that are probably a lot bigger than we might anticipate that they are now are going to be enormous, and I know that went into the decision-making process. And you know, again, there's all sorts of context that you have when you're making these decisions inside the company. And those things include death threats against employees, threats of physical violence against employees, and you have to balance all of these things when you're trying to make a decision in real time about what to do. So for people to sit outside and, you know, throw stones and say they did the right thing or they did the wrong thing, it just feels a lot like Monday morning quarterbacking when you know the results of what happened, and it's easy to say, you know, hey, they shouldn't have gone for it on 4th and 2. Well, yeah, they didn't make it. We all know that now, so it's obvious in hindsight. So, you know, that's my perspective on this. I think a lot of people think it's an obvious decision one way or the other, and none of those people have the context that the management teams of these companies have.
Now, the president's aides, as we understand, have been exploring alternative options like Parler, which may never find another web hosting home, or Gab. It's also been suggested the president could start his own social network. Do you think that he could successfully do that at this point?
It's remarkably difficult to start a social network, irrespective of who you are or the resources that you have, or the people that you know, or how well financed you are. I mean, you know, look at Google, you know, and how much money and time and resources and energy went into Google Plus, which is now no longer with us. So that would be sounds like a 1 in a million. Oh, and not because of who the person is or what they think, just because of how remarkably difficult it is for these things to get any momentum.
Now, Twitter shares have suffered over the last couple of days. They recovered a bit today. You know, there's concern that President Trump leaving the platform is really going to hurt Twitter. Are you worried about that?
You know, I think that the notion that, you know, engagement metrics or ad revenue, you know, would go down as a result of the company taking some action, and that maybe why they did or didn't do something. I think as your previous guest mentioned about Airbnb, that doesn't ever go into the decision-making equation. It just doesn't. It's easy to think that, and it's easy for people to look at this from the outside and say, well, they must be worried about engagement. That's why they, let this person stay on the platform. Or those things are not part of the equation. It's all this other stuff. It's what are the downstream regulatory restrictions going to be that are going to be brought to bear against us? What are the global political ramifications we're going to face? There are heads of state of other countries that say lots of horrible things on the platform. Or are we going to be, is our hands going to be tied there? Or are our hands going to be forced there? Those are the kinds of things that go into these decision-making processes, along with the threats of physical violence against employees. It's much less about, gosh, we're worried about engagement metrics going down. I'm sure the company has some sense of what that might look like, but I don't think it went into the decision-making process.
Now, it seems it's hard to believe it's been almost a year since the pandemic began, and you joined us early on saying that you were still a buyer in the public markets. We've seen more market turmoil over the last few days. We face some uncertainty ahead, given the administration changeover, what could or could not be a peaceful transition of power. I wonder, are you still a buyer in the public markets? And what are you doing and buying in the private markets?
I'm more of a buyer in the private markets. I think in the public markets, the risk is extraordinarily underpriced right now, almost surprisingly so. The markets seem to ignore it, which is interesting. In the private markets, however, and you've got another guest coming on, Max Levchin, I think later on, in the fintech space, I think in the private markets, fintech continues to be underappreciated. And perhaps surprisingly so, given how well it's doing in the public markets. You've got companies like Square and Adyen and others that are, as public companies, up almost 100-fold from their IPOs just a few years ago. And there are a number of companies in the private markets, like a couple of our investments, Tipalti, a global payments automation platform, and Spot On, a point-of-sale solution that we're super excited about and we think continue to be underappreciated in the private markets.
You mentioned Tipalti there, an alternative payments solution. In terms of, where are you placing your bets, and how do you see work and the future of work evolving, given that nobody knows what the new normal is actually going to be, how we're going to be paying for things, where we're going to be working, whether or not we're ever going to go back to the office?
Wow, that got dark there for a second. Look, I think we're going to go back to the office, but what's sort of become obvious is that collaboration tools and the ability to automate anything that was previously a manual process is going to be vital and critical, because some percentage of work will be remote going forward, whether that's a 10% or 95%, remains to be seen, but it's not going to be close to 0% anymore. So collaboration software and software that automates formerly manual processes like Tipalti, which again automates global payables and payments solutions, those are going to be invaluable, and their total addressable market is just going to continue to grow. So we love those kinds of companies. They tend to not have much churn at all. Once you migrate to them, you tend to use them for more and more things. And we've seen with Tipalti, its annual top line growth has accelerated. So we think, irrespective of what happens with the future of remote work, as it were, it's going to include more things being automated and more collaboration tools. And we're investing heavily into that space, wherever we see those things.